No matter how full my closet gets, I swear I have nothing that I want to wear, which is why I'm super grateful for Armoire, because with their clothing rental membership, I get to have access to high quality, unique brands tailored just for me. All I had to do was take a 5-minute style quiz, and it was scary accurate with how much they knew my style, and by some kind of magic, it was delivered at my door within 2 days. If I want to try something new or swap out styles, I just send it. No laundry required. Best thing. Armoire is great for so many reasons. It can help define your personal style. It's super spot on. And also it's sustainable because I don't have to feel bad about if I wear an outfit one time and I just want to try something new. I can rent things, try them out, and keep swapping and not have to worry about waste. Plus, you're always going to have something to wear without hassle or clutter in your closet, which is what I really relate to. And no matter what occasion you have, whether it's a date or a work conference or a black tie event, you'll be the best dressed person in the room without even stepping a foot into the fitting room. This is fantastic because I've literally bought an entire outfit before just to go to one party. Armoire can also help if your body is changing, whether that's a fitness journey or during pregnancy. I know I've recommended this to a lot of the new moms that I know in my life, because your body's changing and you want to feel great and amazing. And one of my favorite things is that Armoire is women owned and led. They even spotlight women owned designers on their website. Right now, our listeners can give Armoire a try and get up to 50% off their first month. That is up to $125 off. Just visit armoire.style/booktalk. That's Armoire, ARMOIRE.style/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get 50% off your first month.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA. This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Welcome to Book Talk for Book Talk with Jac and Amy, your besties with a literary podcast that deep dives into your favorite novels.
This is Jac.
And I'm Amy, and we're currently in the middle of our spring book club, but today we're taking a break to talk to Alwyn Hamilton and her new novel, The Notorious Virtues.
Alwyn Hamilton was born in Toronto and spent her childhood bouncing between Europe and Canada until her parents settled in a small town in France. She left France for Cambridge University to study history of art at King's College, and then to London. She is the author of The Rebel of the Sands, Traitor to the Throne, and Hero at the Fall. Welcome to the show, Alwyn.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for going on that. The listeners will never know, will never have heard the journey that it took for you to get on this podcast with Chrome and everything.
We got there in the end, and that's what's important. So it's not about the destination, it's the journey. All that.
Exactly. Remember that for this destination being the podcast. That's
destination being Google Chrome.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, Alwyn, we're so excited to have you here, and we're very excited about your new book, The Notorious Virtues. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the book's premise so they know what we're journeying into today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I pitched it as 1920s Great Gatsby style New York heiresses meets grim fairy tales. And it's about a family that has passed down wealth and power over the generations by trials of virtues instead of by the firstborn or any other sort of concept like that. And so this is about this generation's trials, which have come up unexpectedly because the previous heiress, the heiress ascendant, has been murdered. And so all of the cousins have to compete unexpectedly to be the next head of the family. And so it follows two of the heiresses as well as some other characters who live in the city as they compete to be the leader of their very, very wealthy family.
Yeah, the Great Gatsby of it makes a lot of sense. I was going Family Feud which I'll mention later.
Love that too. Love that
Yeah.
too. Although I feel like the Holtzfalls wouldn't be like, great choice anytime that someone does something. They're sort of competitive with each other.
I love for lack of a better word, the vibes of this. I love Gatsby, and we all love a really good competition trope. And I love that this is between family because it just makes it uglier, I think.
Yeah.
I'm very excited.
It's something we can all relate to, like just the dynamics between, I mean, I don't want to say this because I love my cousins and some listen to the podcast, but like just the dynamics of like competitiveness amongst family and residual trauma, like the generational residual trauma. And I feel like I talk about this a lot, like amongst friends, where it's like the roles you're given so young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, and I think I don't know anyone who has a perfect relationship with every single person in there, either immediate family or extended family. And I think you definitely do inherit things from the previous generation as well, being like, and then this is what your aunt did when I was 6. And you're like, okay, like, kind of thing. I have a very good relationship with some of my cousins. I saw one last weekend when she'd flown over from Canada for a little bit of a trip. And so I got to catch up with her. And it reminded me, as though I don't see them very often because they live across the Atlantic, how much I do love some of my cousins. And then some I have less contact with. But yeah, I think it's so much harder when you have like these pre-existing relationships going into sort of as I mentioned, the trial trope that comes up a lot. But yeah, so much about your competition, but also have these deep-rooted things since you were children, but also since your parents were children that come up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really, really love the family aspect of it. Like, obviously that's what we've been talking about, but I just hope that, and you just don't get to see cousins a lot in books. Like, where's the representation of cousins? I have a lot of cousins. I'm an only child, have step siblings, but like for the most part, only child, but with like a lot of cousins. So this was kind of, again, it didn't resonate because I don't want to kill mine, but it did resonate in the sense that I was like, I got a bunch, so I understand how that is.
I have a bunch on one side and much fewer on the other side. And the side that I have a bunch, there are some who are sort of in their like late 40s, and then some who are sort of, just, in their late 20s kind of thing. So we're a big span of cousins. And then there's a group of us who are all kind of the same age, a little bit. If you ask some people, they were like, well, we were competing with each other. She had a girl, so I had to have a girl, kind of thing. So again, these are these things that come up before you even, had a chance to go on a play date.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me of like suddenly you're unlocking childhood memories of like, certain family members accidentally putting us against each other, where it's being like, well, they're so smart and they're so pretty. And it's like, well, the hell? Yeah. You're just unlocking trauma for me. Don't worry.
Sorry. And how does that make you feel? This is now,
let's get it. Can I inspire book 2 for you? Also, I should flag to the listeners, this is a YA book, but I think that this is a perfect example of how the YA books of today are not the YA books that we grew up on. It feels so much more sophisticated, and I've like been getting a lot more into modern YA. Like, it reminds me of, in many ways, like Divine Rivals, in the sense of like,
I loved Divine Rivals. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I love Divine Rivals too. So I hope you take that as the compliment, where it's like, this is, because it just was like, the themes, listeners, it's mature. Like, it's not it's something that I would totally want younger version of me to read, but I also want me version to read.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I just wanted to let people know, because all of a sudden, like, people might be like, wait, I don't know. I just don't like when people like flag, they're like, YA, I can't read it. I'm 30 something. And it's like, no.
I heard someone put it really well once, that saying that you can't read a YA because you're not a teenager is a bit like saying you couldn't read a detective novel because you're not a police officer. Like, just, you can't, just because you're not the thing in the book doesn't mean you can't share those experiences and resonate with them. And also, everyone was a teenager. Not everyone was a police officer. So you should be able to in some way identify with the teenager, the coming of age, hopefully. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. Like, I've never been a 19-year-old trying to keep my family alive with a bow and arrow and met a hot fae. Like, that's not...
That doesn't mean that you don't enjoy reading about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of touched on a little bit of the world. You kind of mentioned Grimm's fairy tale books and everything, and I think that's important because the world, I'm realizing I have this thing when like we talk about with authors about books, I get nervous because I never say the words out loud. It's all in my head. So then I get really nervous about it. So I'm
I
like,
totally get
Waltstad.
Waltstad. I had to read the book out loud for the first time last Monday. I sort of had an abrupt thing on BBC Radio, and they were like, could you read this passage from the book? And I was like, there's a lot of like Holtzfall and Wallstad and like a lot of the words I made up in this sort of short paragraph you've given me to read. I think next time everyone's going to be called Smith.
Yeah.
I'm about to have to read this on BBC Radio.
Yeah. Thank you for understanding, because I'm about to read the next question and I'm like, Waltstad. Okay. So the world of Waltstad, it is very unique. I love the 1920s vibes of it, but also the fairy tale and it's the mixing of the different worlds. I think it falls like it's fantasy, but it falls a lot under fantastical, which I really enjoy fantastical books. It's the world and the layered that everything that you have going on with it of like, I didn't realize the Great Gatsby was such a big influence, but again, you say it and it makes a lot of sense. What would you say have been some real world influence, historical, contemporary that shaped it? Because it does feel very grounded in reality.
Thank you. I mean, the fairy tale influence sort of comes in the world and in the story, because essentially we've all seen the structure, I think, in fairy tales where it's like the king had 3 sons and he didn't know who should inherit, so he sent them out into the woods to get the golden bird, and they pass an old lady on the road and the eldest son spits on her and the second son kicks her and the third one's like, have my sandwich, and it turns out that she knew where the golden bird was, and by not being a complete dick, the youngest one wins, kind of thing. And that is essentially a morality tale of like, be nice and you will be rewarded in the larger world. So that's sort of what the Trial of Virtues is based on, in part, is sort of that fairy tale theme, essentially. But they're testing different virtues in this instance. So just because you are brave doesn't mean that you're nice. Just because you're clever doesn't mean that you're good, kind of thing. So not even though they are virtuous in their own ways, not all virtues are made equally. And I don't think every single one of the Holtzfall heiresses would help the old lady on the road necessarily. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they're falling behind in the competition. So that was a sort of a huge influence there. And then I kind of really wanted to meld that, something I really find that my brain just does naturally, and I did in my first series as well, as sort of meld two things that don't seem like they go together and sort of see how they sort of fit interestingly and kind of contrast each other. So sort of the magic and the 1920s was a huge sort of time of rise of technology. Everyone was getting cars and, industry and things like that. So merging that with sort of old school fairy tale magic seems like it should be dissonant. And I wanted to put it together and see how it plays out, essentially.
That's so smart, though, because, there's an element of, books and fairy tale magic where the hero, the lead, the heroine, right, is kind of like new to the world of magic. And it just reminds me of Lottie, of, the moment where, she kind of sees like the fancy car coming in. I'm just leaving it at that. I don't want any spoilers, but when she sees like a car, there's almost like a fantastical element to reality, like there's that, it's a thing that we're used to. It's a thing that in theory, this world is used to, but so you're mixing the fantastical with the magic, but the fantastical with the technology. And that would have been the case for people in the 20s when they'd never seen a car before.
Yeah. And a lot of the magic that they use does what technology does in our world. It powers cars, it powers light bulbs, it powers things like that. And I had someone ask me, being like, well, if you could have a charm from from the world, what would you pick? And I was like, most of them I can kind of do with modern technology. Like there's, have like magic rings that can cool them off at a party. And I was like, I've got air conditioning, I've got those little hand fans that we all use, kind of thing. So I don't want that to take away from the glamour and the magic, but there's also a practicality to the magic and sort of the evolution of technology that I really wanted to use. Because if you did have magic, most of the time you probably wouldn't use it to sort of set fires and, bring down lightning storms. You would use it for practical everyday things. I actually now don't remember whether this made it into the final draft, but there was a point where one of the characters had charmed shoes that don't sink into the grass at garden parties. And I think we've all been there at like an outdoor wedding, being like trying to wrench our high heels out of the grass. Yeah. And,
that's really smart.
That is great.
Yeah.
I love that, because I think what makes, and I'm not pointing fingers at any books, but what makes magic difficult to accept in some worlds in other books is that it's convenient for the plot rather than convenient for the world.
Yeah.
And so to me, this feels very, and I hope you take this as a compliment, even though it feels like
it's a compliment. It's coming.
It's a compliment. It does feel like Harry Potter in the wizarding world because there's magic for everything, and it's so ingrained in the culture and the way that they operate that it feels real. And I don't need to I don't need to have every element explained. I don't need to understand how the potion works. I don't need to understand how the charm works. It's just so integral to how they live that it feels real.
Thank you. No, I do take that as a compliment. I appreciate it.
I was thinking Harry Potter quite a bit throughout also, but again, in a complimentary term, not in a J.K. Rowling is dead to me term.
I'm one of the Harry Potter, as tricky as it is now, bookmarked my childhood. I read the first 3 when I was 11, and the last one came out the summer before I went to university. It was literally like, well, your childhood is done.
Same.
Kind of.
Yeah, aligned.
Yeah, it's a tricky one now for all the reasons that we know of, but I will never be able to get rid of the fact that it ingrained in me from ages.
We all studied Death of the Author. I mean, well, you went to history, you did arts, historical arts, but I'm sure, Death of the Artist. It's I studied a summer in Cambridge at St. Cat's.
Nice. Did you enjoy it?
I loved it so much that I went and did my master's in London. I went to Queen Mary University of London, so I lived in Mile End for...
I didn't know if I should expect you to be English or not.
Yeah, I lived in Mile End for like 2 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I'm the other side of London. I'm West London, deep West London.
Fancy. Yeah, I was...
Not as fancy as people think. But
What zone?
I am in zone 2. I'm in Chiswick, so it's a nice neighborhood. But
nice. That's the zone 2 is the ideal zone, in my opinion.
Yes, it's true.
Someone who lived in zone 2.
a lot of transport opinions. A lot of like.
It really is a lot. Okay, sorry. I was like, I had to slide that in, where I was like, no.
I'm glad you had a good experience. You studied English,
comparative literature. Yeah.
Got it.
And I would not have come back if the visa laws had not changed literally 3 months before I showed up.
Oh, that sucks. But you came back and, as my dad always says, don't question the road that got you there if you're happy where you wound up. And you wouldn't be doing this if you hadn't come back, I suppose.
So is this therapy for me?
Sorry. Getting deep.
Like, you're making me feel things, and like, I'm okay with it.
That's all right. She needed that feel good.
I really do. Mercury's in retrograde.
It's so early for you guys as well. If it was 7 a.m. for me, I'd be like, I don't know what my book's about. I haven't had coffee yet.
Well, going back to the book, Nora and is it Lottie?
Yeah, Lottie. I changed the spelling a couple of times. There were times where it was IE and times where it was just E and before settles. But yeah, it's Lottie, not Lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lot.
Yeah.
Nora and Lottie come from such contrasting backgrounds. One's, the darling heiress or a media darling, and the other is raised in abuse.
Just straight up abuse, really. Like...
How did you approach writing their voices and experiences, since they're so different, not to mention all the other very distinct point of views that you also include?
Also, for the listeners, this is like us writing the question, being like angry about, was like raised in abuse. Lottie was raised in a convent, but it's for like extra, in case someone's listening and is surprised when they go into it. But continue.
No, it's you don't see too much of her time there because obviously the story starts as she's leaving, but it's definitely a rough place to grow up. In terms of getting into the voices, it actually took the thing that took me the longest was getting out of writing first person, because my previous trilogy was first person, and one of the reasons I did want to write multiple POVs is just because I was just like, I've been talking to you for a long time, like we need to make other friends, you and me, for fictional person that I'm writing. Like being in one person's head for 3 books was a lot, and so but literally I remember when I was writing the first chapter, I would switch in the middle of it. I would be writing, like, Lottie walked down the street. I looked up at the sky, and I was like, nope, you can't do that. So I kept having to sort of pull myself into third person out of first person. That was sort of one challenge. Lottie was, interestingly, where the story started. because in a couple of different ways, but one of them was, because you mentioned the abuse element, is one of my good friends is a social worker, and she mentioned to me that there's a real issue in fantasy books with this, the glorifying of the birth family over the adoptive family. So it is coming back to Harry Potter, it's the Dursleys effect. It's, oh, your parents were wonderful magical wizards, not these stupid, boring people who brought you up. And as someone who deals with a lot of kids in adoption and foster care, she has a huge issue with that. And she said the two that are really good examples that you can give to kids who are not being raised by their biological parents are Superman. Superman is raised by lovely adoptive parents, but he doesn't forgo the thing that he was born as. He doesn't have to erase the part of him that is not biologically their child. And the other one that she mentioned that is great for kids in adoption is Kung Fu Panda, which is not what I thought she was going to say at that point. But she was like, I really wish people would write more positive stories of positive adoption, where it's not like your mom was secretly a princess and now you're heir to the throne or whatever.
Yeah.
Really what I heard was write terrible, terrible birth family.
Yeah.
So, sort of playing with that trope that you see a lot in fantasy of, oh, the background she's in is abusive and it's not great and and she's going to be rescued by this glorious, glamorous family who are bringing her back into the fold, but they're bringing her back into the fold because they want something. And her cousins are not particularly receptive to her. It's not like, come and sit on the throne. It's come fight for the throne against the only thing you've ever wanted, which is your immediate family. And so it sort of started with her. And so I was writing her. I wrote the first few chapters as Lottie, and then I switched over to Nora because I knew I wanted there to be like an insider as well. And Nora's voice just clicked into place. And I was like, oh, you're fun. You're fun to hang out with. You're fun to talk to. And I liked having Lottie because you do occasionally need that person without overdoing it. You need that character who's able to be like, what's that? And someone explain for the reader the magic or whatever it is or the rules. And Nora's not that person because she's such an insider. But so I was good balancing the two of them. I think they hopefully balance each other out nicely in the narrative.
Yeah. Nora's great. Like it is one of those, everything you should be kind of annoyed at or dislike in someone. And yet I adore you. And there's someone that she has some great banter with in this book that did have me cracking up and everything. And also, your narrow third person is very well written.
Thank you.
My comparative literature side is coming out. It's like you didn't really have to like, for a lot of scenes do the italicize thoughts. You were able to do a very hone in third person, which I don't think people, that's what we do on the podcast. We're look at the single line and how this single line was able to there's a moment where Nora's mentally talking with her guard. They're not mentally talking. They're just giving each other looks, but it was all done in third person. And I was like, ooh, that's impressive. Cause that's hard because third person has that distance to it. So
appreciate
that's
that.
a very niche compliment. I thank you.
I love it. I've never gotten
it is a huge compliment.
Yeah. Niche, but it's there, but it's the Veritas itself is like earlier I was saying, a family feud mixed with magical trial family feud, but with a dose of social commentary, which I always love a book where it's this is fun. Boom, social commentary. How do you feel about that? How did you design the competition structure and what role did you want it to play in exploring those themes of the books, like privilege and the responsibility that comes with power?
One of the first things I knew was that I didn't want it to be, again, we're talking a lot about Harry Potter, but I didn't want it to be like the fourth Harry Potter book where it's this trial is coming on this day and you have time to prepare for it. So
yeah,
I didn't want it to be that structure because I wanted it to come back to again, you're wandering on a quest in the woods and you happen to pass this thing. Is it a test? Is it just an old woman on the road kind of thing? So that was a little bit tricky from a writing point of view because there is a structure obviously in being and there will be a trial every 3 days and in a situation, whereas there could be 3 trials on the same day and a week without them kind of thing. So it did make it quite tricky to lay that out and have that anticipation, but I think I got there in the end. And there was also one of the first things I did was sort of write down all the possible virtues it could be and which ones would be most interesting to test. And one of the things I really wanted to balance as well was who I'm trying not to be spoiler, but who wins what where.
Yeah.
Just so I didn't want it to be too easy for our main characters. I wanted it to be earned, but I also wanted it to not necessarily be the virtues that they thought that they were going to get, essentially. And Nora is a smart, capable, has many virtues to her person, but always thought that she was going to be handed the seat of power. Until her mother died, she was not going to have to compete, and now she does. And so I also wanted it to be a little bit of I don't want to knock her self-esteem down, because that's not super interesting. The fact that she is just recklessly self-confident is just part of her. But I wanted it to make her question sort of what her actual values were and what virtues she possesses versus how she's maybe underestimated and not seen the competition around her, and seen that there are people in her family who she knows that she's better than, but are still threats to her, essentially. So yeah.
I struggle with that too, knowing when you're better than someone else and having to, humble yourself. No.
Nora does not know. Humility is not a test of virtue she would have won.
It is one of those where it's like, I'm not supposed to want to be like her, and yet I do. There's a brazenness to it in her, because she's 16. You'd almost imagine, like, what 16-year-old is this confident? But it makes sense because there's a naivety to that confidence, which is something that only a 16-year-old can be.
Yeah. I think if you had met her before the book started and before she's gone through the devastating loss of her mother, the confidence might have been a tiny bit more abrasive, because it would have been less nuanced. She's the life of the party. Everything in the world revolves around her. And essentially she's trying to get that back. So there's a little bit of a sharper edge to her coming in, that because she's on the brink of losing it, which I think does make her more interesting. I think if the book had started 3 months before, readers might be like, who's this bitch? Kind of thing. She's not all that. Oh, she has everything. Cool.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
You're like, all right, she's experienced horrible trauma that,
exactly.
I don't want anyone to go through, but fine.
Makes her
I'll
more interesting, I think, and makes her confidence a little bit more interesting and a little bit less abrasive, I think, than might otherwise have been.
Yes. I love a character where you're like, am I supposed to like you? But I love you.
I love her too. I think I don't think, we're not supposed to have favorite children, but she might be my favorite.
I think that's allowed. Nice. I think it's allowed.
Yeah, I think as an author, you're entitled to that.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah, I know.
I think one of the reasons people are like, I don't have favorite children is because you are supposed to give them all equal time. And in writing the second one, I'm like, and now what's Nora doing? Like, let's have just a chapter from her.
I know. Let's just go check on her. What's she up to?
Because she's probably up to something fun.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So I haven't had a chance to read your other trilogy, Rebel of the Sands. So I apologize if this question is like...
No, I'm joking.
Well, I might be shooting in the dark, so I apologize if this is off base, but it seems like that series might have more folklore involved, whereas the Notorious Virtues is more fairy tale. And for some people that might not be a distinct difference, but I think for us it's a distinct difference. Sure. And that feels like a shift in tone. What drew you to this idea of wanting this new aesthetic, for lack of a better word, shifting into the Grimm's fairy tales?
So it's actually quite tricky, because it's sort of like, you don't have to have read Rebel of the Sands to read the Notorious Virtues, but they are set in the same world. And there is, and that's sort of an Easter egg thing. If you've read both, you might realize that, but you don't have to figure it out. Nora's grandmother is a teenager in Rebel of the Sands. She is one of the spoilers for Rebel of the Sands. She's one of the children of the usurped sultan who was on his side and has been exiled because of that, because she was on the wrong side of the rebellion that happens in Rebel of the Sands. And so I wanted to sort of have a little baby Link. And also I wanted not all the characters to be blonde, blue-eyed white people. So I was like, let's have someone who's come from a different place, who's brought a different perspective. But I did also still want the folklore and the magic to feel distinct from each other. I didn't just want to repeat what I'd done in Rebel of the Sands, but I still had to follow the rules of the world that I'd set in Rebel of the Sands. So one of the things I established in Rebel of the Sands was that any immortal being is male. There are no female immortal beings. And so that has become a little bit trickier in writing the Notorious Virtues because, God, you would not believe how many of the sort of like mystical creatures in German folklore and things like that are women. So it's sort of trying to work around that. And one of the sort of big aspects that comes up in Rebel of the Sands are there's quite a few people in it who are half immortal being, half human. And I wanted to sort of give a nod to that. I mentioned very briefly that they're like, what if that's what Lottie is? Because we don't know who her father is for quite a bit of the book. But not then repeat that pattern kind of thing. So it was using a sort of different folkloric background, more sort of Rebel of the Sands is set in a desert. So there's not a lot of like water beings and things like that, whereas German folklore and Nordic folklore, there's a lot of those. So sort of touching base on things that they just don't have in the desert. Essentially. And I do make sort of clear in Rebel of the Sands that each place kind of has their own way that they deal with magic. So that did also give me a little bit of freedom. It didn't have to be like, and this is how everyone in the whole world uses magic the same way anyone uses belief systems, across the world, or technology, or how it evolves in sort of different ways. I sort of wrote myself into some corners there in Rebel of the Sands that I then had to obey those rules when I started writing the Notorious Virtues, which was, I think, probably a good exercise. It gave me some boundaries to play within, and not here's the entirety of fairy tales and folklore.
That's extremely brave, knowing that you're like, I'm going to take this world I've already created that already has rules and try to write a new story. Because it's on one hand, yes, you already know the rules, but on the other hand, it's all the more challenging and requires you to be even more creative because you have a different story to tell. You have a different cast of characters. You have a different society. So I applaud you with that. I had no idea that they were connected.
Yeah.
Like, you can read them separately. You don't have to have read Rebel to read Notorious, but if you have, there's a couple of little Easter eggs in there that will reward you.
So are we calling it the Alwyn verse, the Allverse, the Hamilverse, the Hamilton verse?
I'm open to coming up with a name. I don't have one yet. Yeah.
I for whatever reason, Hamilverse kind of sounds good.
And do people think it's Mark Hamill? Do they think it's a Star Wars thing?
Oh no, yeah.
And then Hamilton, I have one of those tricky names that's also attached to a very famous.
I know. Okay, so Alwyn verse, yeah.
I'm down with that. Not too many Alwyns out there. Just me.
I think so. I think there's some room to like market that one, but
exactly.
yeah, one of my dreams is to like write my own verse, universe and everything, but like then I just sit there and I get overwhelmed with the ideas of like, then how is it all connected?
Yeah, I think for me it's sort of one piece at a time, and it was a very deliberate choice when I finished Rebel of the Sands and I was sitting down with my agent to talk about what I would write next, and I had multiple ideas, and a couple of them just couldn't have been in the same universe as Rebel of the Sands, just for what they were in terms of, I could, even if I was like, and it was 1,000 years ago and in a country far away, I'm like, I couldn't have like shoehorned that in. So it was a very deliberate choice that I was like, I do want to build this world out a little bit more before I write something that's not in the world, which I think will come in a little while. But I feel like I sort of slowly but surely establishing a world. If I wanted to revisit it as sort of side stories of some of the characters, I think there'd be more stories to tell in different countries and things like that. But I hadn't planned that there's this whole other country, and 50 years after Rebel of the Sands, this will happen there. When I started Rebel of the Sands, I barely planned what was going to happen in that trilogy. So brick by brick thing.
Yeah, I love it because you address the other country part, which like so many times in like fantasies you're like, we're gonna discuss this group here, now what happens beyond that we will never know. That's
I think it's because Rebel of the Sands is at a certain technological point. They have trains, they have guns. It's kind of like mid 1800s, and I think it would be unrealistic for them to be like, and we trade with no one else and have no idea what goes on outside of our borders, which I think I could have gotten away with if it was 1,000 years before kind of thing. But you think of our world at that time, and there were trade routes all over the world, and there was colonization, and people knew what was going on. So I think it felt natural for me to sort of start to allude to what's going, even though they never leave the borders of the desert. There is mentions of this foreign power, and we imported this from here, and kind of thing.
So another thing, that we kind of want to shift a little bit the conversation, but another unique aspect of your fantasy and something of your books and something that we don't really see in modern fantasy is media and reporting. Such a unique take on just modern fairy tale of it, like, I don't know. I'm like, I swear I have more words in me, but but it plays such a large role in your story and with your characters. Was exploring the intersection between media and power something that you knew you wanted to dive into?
I think it felt natural when I knew it was going to be about heiresses. And I think sometimes now we associate heiresses with like Paris Hilton, and that's not what I mean here. I sort of mean the heiresses of a very certain time, but they were still they were the first it girls, and they were created by the media. Their power was broader than it had been before, not just because they had money and beauty, but because it was advertised out there. It's sort of the, not to sound too corny, but it's like, it's the first influencers kind of thing of everyone wanted to.
Yeah, though. Yes.
Yeah. So, and I think one of the things that I remember thinking about when I first started writing Notorious Virtues was there was a woman that I worked with when I worked at Christie's, whose name was Tessa Kennedy. She was selling her collection. She was moving out of London and selling the entire collection of her apartment. And I Googled her on a whim to be like, why does this woman have a mad apartment? And it's because, among other things, she decorated the inside of the Ritz. But before that, she, when she was 18, she was the daughter of a lord, and she ran away with a painter. She was 18, he was 21. It was scandalous. They tried to run away to Scotland. They weren't able to get married in Scotland. I can't remember why. And then they wound up in Cuba and got married on the estate of a mob lord in Cuba. And then when Cuba fell to the revolution,
What?
Yes. They fled to, I think they wound up in Miami on a boat with like a bunch of fleeing American National Geographic people, and wound up in New York. And it was all kind of covered by the news. She was a co-celebrity at the time because, of course, it was this huge scandalous story. And the other sort of interesting thing about her is that she is the mother of Carrie Elwes, as in Wesley from The Princess Bride.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
She then went on to marry a director after Dominic Elwes and all these things. So she was one of those sort of people. She was like kind of the daughter of a miner, did this incredible scam. And it was because it was sort of so media covered, that she became so much greater than she was, and then went on to do sort of these glamorous jobs like work like decorating the Ritz, which I don't necessarily think is something that would have been granted to her if she hadn't become this like media darling kind of thing. And then has media darling children, all of our childhood crush. So I think she was I remember being at my desk at Christie's and Googling her, and being like, I'm going to put this in a book someday. And not exactly that, obviously, but she is kind of the inspiration for the model of the heiresses in the Notorious Virtues, and how the press kind of plays
a role.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to go find a documentary or something.
What?
That is,
there should be a documentary. I hope she's still alive. By the time I met her, tiny, like 5'0" 7-year-old woman. She tried to set up our specialist, who was married with her other son, and she was like, "Oh no, I have a husband." And I was like, "Charlotte, if you are told that you're going to date with the brother of Wesley from The Princess Bride, go. I don't care.
Yeah.
You forget your husband and you go. You take that wedding ring, hide it in your pocket, and you go on that date." Hey,
I want you to know that I am single, and if there's ever you need me to take a hit for anything, throw me in there.
If Dominic Elwes' second son is still available,
Yeah, pat me in, coach, that I will.
Well, it's funny because this is tangential, but because the world is about this big, on the Eurostar back after Easter one time, I ended up sitting next to her ex-assistant on the train. Just one of those things. I don't normally talk to people on transport, but it was a whole thing. And she had to like move her kid to her lap. And I was like, "I'm so sorry." And then we started talking, and it turns out that she'd been her PA 25 years ago. And I was like, why is the world so tiny?
That's so random and so funny. I love it. The world is just one big small town.
Truly, yeah.
Well, without giving too much away, can you tell us what's to come, or what readers should expect or look forward to?
So I'm writing
such a vague question, an open-ended question, but if you wanted to let anything slip, feel free.
What happens to Nora, and is this person dead? No. I am writing book 2 at the moment. Notorious Virtues is going to be a duology because I
Yes.
burned myself out writing a trilogy, and I was like,
Yeah, that's fair.
I need a breather. But it's without spoiling too much, the way that book 1 ends brings a pretty big shift in the world and in the dynamic that is set up there. And you mentioned folklore and how much more of it there is in Rebel of the Sands. And because of the way, she's tiptoeing, because of the way that book 1 ends, you will see a lot more of that in book 2, because part of the sort of structure of the world that's set up in book 1 is that one of the reasons the Holtzels have so much power is that they are one of the things that keeps the dangerous things in the woods.
Yeah.
That power structure may no longer be quite as in place as it should be, and things may start to realize that they're not held in the woods anymore. So so again, a lot of like, why did you have to say that there were no women immortal creatures? There's so many fun ones from mythology. But yeah, a lot of fun things to play with, to kind of bring sort of the magic and technology to a real head with each other. And also to see how sort of power structure systems that have been in place for a long time can't last forever. And there is a version of this book, obviously Rebel of the Sands is about a large-scale rebellion. There is a version of the Notorious Virtues that, if written from the side of the people who are not in power, looks real bad for my main characters, that they're the enemy.
Yeah.
And so there is another point of view character. These things could change. My editor hasn't seen it yet, but there's a point of view character who comes in who is who sort of has that other perspective on things, who's been quite an
I love that, though.
Right.
I would definitely love something because then it would help, for those of us who are obsessed with Nora, it would kind of help challenge that even more, and be like, we could still love her, but like, what if we bring in this dose of reality?
Yes. I think the thing that I really wanted to create with Nora is that she's not one of those heiresses who's like, what do you mean there are people who are poor? She's like, I just deserve more because I'm better. And I understand that can be a hard pill to swallow. And I think that is challenged a little bit of what do you actually, if you have power, what do you actually use it for? And I referred in my first book, when explaining it to people who haven't read it, to a certain political party. I just referred to them as magical communists quite a bit. They're called the Grims, but magical communists. And so essentially, I've also had to sort of revisit quite a bit of my history lessons from high school, being like, remind me how communism works and why it doesn't. That's also kind of been part of it in terms of like the power structure.
Yeah, humans are the reason why communism doesn't work.
Such a tricky thing, those humans.
Yeah. In the way. Well, do you know what? A lot of them die in this book, so they won't be in the way.
So the Notorious Virtues comes out April 1st, right?
Is it April 1st?
April 1st?
It is, yeah. I know it sounds like a prank, but I promise.
I know.
April 1st. Yeah,
it's like all of a sudden I'm like, Amy, you're questioning me. I'm like, no.
It's March 27th in the UK and then April 1st in the US. So just a few days later, because release dates in the UK are Thursday and then the US are a Tuesday rather. One of those things. So we're still getting the Hunger Games tomorrow. Don't worry.
Okay.
That would be a revolt if we got it 3 days later.
Yeah.
Seriously, I know, right?
Yeah. So
and then,
for
where can people find you if they want to know more?
You can find me. So my website is alwynhamilton.com. I've got all of my events and upcoming books there. I've got a newsletter you can sign up for there that I update people with intermittently. You can also find me making nonsensical TikToks. I think that's just Alwyn Hamilton as well. And then I'm on Instagram. Again, it's really good. I have an uncommon name, so I'm basically just Alwyn Hamilton everywhere.
I really love your name.
Thank you.
It's a very good name.
I appreciate
that. Is it? I mean, is it your real name? Was it given to you, or did you choose it? Is it a pen name?
I asked that. I was chairing Callie Hart when she was over here, and I asked her. I was like, "Wait, what's Callie short for?" She looked at me, and I was like, "It's obviously not your real name, is it?" She's like, "It's not." And I was like, "Of course it's not. Why would it be your real name?"
That happened to us with Kate Golden, and we were. We were like almost done with the interview, planning on when to get dinner, and I was like, that's not your real name?
Yeah, no, Alwyn is my real name. I'm lucky. I was almost Pia because at the time my parents thought we would move to France, not to France, but to Italy rather than to France. And my mom was like, "She'll be Pia. It's a perfect Italian name." My dad was like, "She'll be mocked in every English speaking environment."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Why? It doesn't rhyme with anything bad."
Oh,
So I wound up Alwyn. My mom is Athlyn, and one of her sisters is Bronwyn. We have a lot of those kind of names in the family.
Yeah.
I love all those names.
Yeah,
I love that.
it's funny because Welsh is the only ancestry that we're not. It's, my mom's grandparents are English on one side, Irish on the other side. My dad's are Scottish on one side, English on the other side. The only thing I'm not is Welsh, but I have a Welsh name.
It works though. It just works. It just works. If you're ever stateside in California, though, if you have any plans there, I'm like, we live in California. This is me.
Where in California are you?
LA.
Yeah.
I'm going on book tour the first week of April. My last stop is LA.
Shut the front door. Can I say hi?
Yeah.
Are you going to the Rip Bodice?
No, we're doing I'm doing an event on the evening of Friday at Vroman's, Pasadena, which is LA, right?
Yeah.
My LA geography, US geography is not great.
Okay, Roman's Cafe, and that's like, and
To Pasadena.
Pasadena on April 4th.
That sounds right, doesn't it? That's the Friday.
Picking up Amy from the airport. I'll still try to make it.
Yeah, drive straight to the bookstore. But yeah, I can actually, I probably have my schedule. I can check what time I actually land. But
because I would love to meet you in person, and like I know I don't want to take up too much of your time today, but I would I literally could just chat to you.
I'm excited. Yeah, no, I'd love that. That sounds really fun.
Yeah, because otherwise, like, I'll talk Cambridge with you for forever. And I'd be like, can we talk about the giant cricket on the clock?
Yeah,
and then...
Of course. As an art historian, I always used to get asked to analyze it. And I don't think we ever did it as part of our curriculum, because our first year curriculum was just seeing things that were in and around Cambridge and, like, sort of building, like, a chronological history there, because there's so much. The furthest we went was Ely. And then but we never got to the clock. People would be like, analyze the clock. And I was like, I can do this off the top of my head.
Please go see Alwyn. Please read The Notorious Virtues. It's a really fun book. I mean, it's intense. It's not just like a fun book, but like it's the world is so much fun. The story is unique, and get your childhood trauma out at the same time. So I highly encourage everyone to read it. Thank you so much for not just doing this interview with us, for taking time out of your day, but for getting onto this interview. Like also like the way that you downloaded Chrome and you got through to get here. Thank you.
Now I'll figure out whether it's on my computer forever or whether and just my default browser now. We'll figure it out.
Welcome to Chrome. But yeah, thank you again
for having me. Thank you. It's been a lovely chat.
Yeah, it was lovely to have you. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the special episode of Book Talk for Book Talk with Jac and Amy. Stick around for next week when we continue our spring book club on Tuesday.
We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. We would also love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our forum at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a future mini episode or a Patreon exclusive episode.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and learn about supporting the show through Patreon or Venmo. You can follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at the handle Book Talk for Book Talk. Bye.
The search for truth never ends. Introducing June's Journey, a hidden object mobile game with a captivating story. Connect with friends, explore the roaring 20s, and enjoy thrilling activities and challenges while supporting environmental causes. After 7 years, the adventure continues with our immersive travels feature. Explore distant cultures and engage in exciting experiences. There's always something new to discover. Are you ready? Download June's Journey now on Android or iOS.